I never thought the sound of a phone hanging up could feel like a knife cutting through my chest. But that's exactly what happened when my daughter said those words to me. "I'm not your bank, Mom. You should have planned better." My name is Marta. I'm 55 years old, and I've spent most of my life believing that love, real love, always finds a way to come back to you. I believed that every sacrifice I made, every night I worked until my hands ached, every meal I skipped so my daughter could eat, would somehow create an invisible bond between us, a bond that couldn't be broken, a bond that meant something. I was wrong. If you're watching this, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever given everything only to be told it wasn't enough, then you'll understand what I'm about to share with you. And if you like stories like this, stories that speak to the heart and show what real life looks like, please subscribe to our channel. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support means everything to us. Also, comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I'd love to know where you are. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. Not to the phone call, but to the years before it. The years when I thought I was building something that would last forever. 23 years ago, I held my daughter Camilla in my arms for the first time. She was so small, so fragile, with tiny fists that gripped my finger like she never wanted to let go. I remember whispering to her in that hospital room, promising her that I would always be there, that I would protect her, that she would never feel alone. I kept that promise. Even when her father left us when she was only 4 years old. Even when the divorce drained every penny I had saved. Even when I had to take 2 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. I worked as a cleaning woman in office buildings. I started at 6 in the evening and finished at 2 in the morning. My knees ached from scrubbing floors. My back hurt from lifting trash bags and moving furniture. My hands became rough and dry, the skin cracking in the winter cold. But I never complained. Not once. Because every time I came home and saw Camilla sleeping peacefully in her bed, I felt like it was all worth it. I didn't buy myself new clothes. I wore the same 3 outfits for years, washing them by hand to save money on the laundromat. I didn't go to the doctor when I felt sick. I told myself it was just tiredness, just stress, just something that would pass with time. I didn't go out with friends or treat myself to anything, not even a cup of coffee at a cafe. Every dollar I earned went to Camilla. Her school supplies, her clothes, her birthday parties, her dance classes. Even though they were expensive and I had to work extra hours to afford them, I wanted her to have the childhood I never had. I wanted her to feel special, loved, important. And she did. At least I thought she did. She was a bright child. Teachers always said she was smart, creative, destined for great things. I was so proud of her. I would sit at parent-teacher meetings, exhausted from work, but smiling as they talked about her potential. I imagined her future, college, a good job, a happy life. And I imagined that when she succeeded, she would look back and remember everything I had done for her. She would understand. But children don't always see what their parents sacrifice. They don't see the tears cried in silence. They don't see the meals skipped or the nights spent worrying about money. They see what's in front of them, and sometimes they take it for granted. As Camilla grew older, she became distant. At first, I told myself it was normal. Teenagers need space. They need to find themselves. I tried not to take it personally when she stopped hugging me goodbye, when she rolled her eyes at my questions, when she spent all her time locked in her room with her phone. But it wasn't just teenage rebellion. It was something deeper, something colder. When she turned 18 and went to college, I thought things would get better. I thought distance would make her appreciate what she had at home. I kept working, kept sending her money whenever she asked for it. She never said thank you. She just took it, as if it were her right. I told myself she was busy. She was studying, making friends, building her future. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who demanded attention or guilt-tripped her child. So I stayed quiet. I waited. I hoped. After college, Camilla got a good job. I was so happy for her. She moved into her own apartment, started earning a decent salary. I thought maybe now, finally, she would have time for me. Maybe now she would call more often. Maybe now she would visit. But the calls became less frequent. The visits stopped almost entirely. When I asked if I could come see her, she always had an excuse. She was busy with work. She had plans with friends. She was tired. She needed her space. I didn't push. I didn't want to be a burden. And then, 6 months ago, everything changed. I started feeling sick. At first, it was just tiredness. I thought it was normal. After all, I had been working hard my entire life. But then came the pain. A deep, constant ache in my chest and stomach that wouldn't go away no matter what I did. I tried to ignore it, tried to keep working, but eventually, it became unbearable. I went to the doctor. I sat in that cold waiting room for hours, clutching my worn purse, feeling embarrassed about my old coat and scuffed shoes. When the doctor finally called my name, I felt a wave of relief. Finally, someone would tell me what was wrong. Finally, I would get help. The diagnosis came like a punch to the gut. I had a chronic condition, one that required expensive medication to manage. Without it, the doctor said, my health would deteriorate rapidly. The pain would get worse. My organs could fail. It could become irreversible. I sat there, staring at the prescription in my hands, feeling the weight of it pressing down on my chest. The medication cost more than I made in a month. My savings were gone, spent on Camila's education, on bills, on emergencies that always seemed to come at the worst time. I had no insurance, no safety net, no one to turn to, except Camila. I didn't want to ask her. I really didn't. I had always been the one who gave, not the one who asked. But I was desperate. I was scared. And she was my daughter. Surely she would understand. Surely she would help. I called her on a Tuesday evening. My hands were shaking as I held the phone. I rehearsed what I would say, trying to keep my voice calm, trying not to sound like I was begging. She answered after 4 rings. Mom? What is it? I'm kind of busy. I took a deep breath. Camila, I need to talk to you about something important. There was a pause. I could hear voices in the background. Laughter. She was with friends. Can it wait? I'm in the middle of something. It's about my health, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I went to the doctor and, are you okay? She interrupted, but her tone wasn't worried. It was impatient. I need medication, I explained. It's expensive, and I don't have the money right now. I was hoping, maybe you could help me, just until I figure something out. Silence. I waited, my heart pounding, hoping she would say yes, hoping she would tell me not to worry, that she would take care of it. Instead, she sighed. Mom, I can't keep doing this. Doing what? I whispered. Bailing you out. I have my own bills, my own life. You should have planned better. You should have saved money instead of spending it all on, I don't know, whatever you spent it on. I felt the tears welling up, but I forced them back. Camila, I spent it on you, on your education, on... I didn't ask you to do that, she snapped. That was your choice. And now you're trying to make me feel guilty about it? I'm not your bank, Mom. The line went dead. I sat there, staring at the phone in my hand, unable to move, unable to breathe. I'm not your bank. Those words echoed in my mind, over and over, like a cruel song I couldn't escape. I had given her everything, and this was what I got in return. Silence, rejection, coldness. I spent that night lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, the pain in my chest growing worse with every breath. But it wasn't just the physical pain anymore. It was something deeper, something that felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside. It was the realization that the person I loved most in the world didn't love me back. Not the way I thought she did. Not the way I needed her to. And I didn't know if I could survive that kind of pain. The days after that phone call blurred together like watercolors left in the rain. I kept replaying our conversation in my mind, searching for something I might have said wrong, some way I could have asked differently that would have changed her answer. Maybe if I hadn't mentioned the money first. Maybe if I had explained how serious it was. Maybe if I had waited for a better time. But deep down, I knew the truth. There was no right way to ask. Because Camila had already made up her mind about who I was to her. I was the woman who cleaned offices, the woman who never finished high school, the woman who wore secondhand clothes and drove a car that was older than most people's children. I was her past, something she had outgrown, something that didn't fit into the shiny new life she had built for herself. I tried to push those thoughts away, but they kept coming back. especially in the quiet moments. When I woke up at 3 in the morning, drenched in sweat from the pain, when I stood in the pharmacy, staring at the medication I couldn't afford, feeling the pharmacist's pitying eyes on me, when I came home to an empty apartment that suddenly felt too big and too silent. I had always been alone in a way. Even when Camilla lived with me, I was alone with my worries, my fears, my exhaustion. But this was different. This was the loneliness of knowing that the person you built your entire life around didn't care if you lived or died. I stopped calling her. What was the point? She had made her position clear, and I had too much pride left to beg. Instead, I tried to manage on my own. I cut the pills in half to make them last longer, even though the doctor had warned me not to. I skipped doses when the pain wasn't too bad, telling myself I could get through it. I ate less, spent less, did everything I could to save money for the medication. But it was never enough. My neighbor Sophia noticed the change in me before I even realized how bad things had gotten. Sophia was 72 years old, a retired nurse who had lived in the apartment next to mine for almost 15 years. We had always been friendly, exchanging pleasantries in the hallway, helping each other with grocery bags, sharing coffee on Sunday mornings when neither of us had anywhere else to be. But I had never told her about my problems. I didn't want to burden anyone, and I definitely didn't want anyone's pity. One afternoon, I was coming home from another failed attempt at finding extra work, anything that would bring in a little more money, when I ran into Sophia in the lobby. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "Marta, you look terrible," she said, not unkindly. "When was the last time you ate something?" I tried to smile to brush it off. "I'm fine, Sophia. Just tired." "You're not fine." She took my arm gently but firmly. "Come, you're having lunch with me." I wanted to refuse, but I didn't have the energy. And truthfully, I was so tired of being alone with my thoughts that even uncomfortable company seemed better than none. Sophia's apartment smelled like garlic and fresh bread. She had been cooking when she heard me in the hallway. She sat me down at her small kitchen table and served me a plate of pasta with vegetables. Simple food, but it tasted like heaven. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until I took the first bite. She didn't ask questions while I ate. She just sat across from me, sipping her tea, watching me with those wise, patient eyes that had probably seen every kind of human suffering during her years as a nurse. When I finally put down my fork, she spoke. "How long have you been sick?" I looked down at my hands. "How did you know?" "I've been a nurse for 40 years, Marta. I know when someone is in pain." She paused. "And I know when someone is suffering alone." Something in her voice broke through the wall I had built around myself. And suddenly, without meaning to, I started crying. Not the quiet, dignified tears I had shed in the privacy of my own apartment. These were deep, wrenching sobs that came from a place I didn't even know existed inside me. Sophia didn't try to stop me. She just reached across the table and held my hand while I fell apart. When I finally managed to speak, the whole story came pouring out. The diagnosis, the medication I couldn't afford, the phone call with Camilla, the way my daughter had dismissed me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience in her busy life. Sophia listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Your daughter said that to you?" she finally asked, her voice hard. I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "After everything you did for her?" "She doesn't see it that way," I whispered. "She thinks I made my own choices, that I'm responsible for my own situation. And what do you think?" I looked up, surprised by the question. "What do I think?" "Yes. Do you think you're responsible for being sick? Do you think you deserve to suffer because you loved your child?" I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came out. Because the truth was, part of me did think that. Part of me believed that if I had been smarter, stronger, better, if I had planned better, as Camilla said, I wouldn't be in this situation. Sophia seemed to read my mind. She squeezed my hand tighter. "Listen to me, Marta. You are not responsible for your daughter's cruelty. You are not responsible for a system that punishes people for being poor. You are not responsible for getting sick." Her voice softened. "But you are responsible for what happens next. And right now, you need to decide if you're going to let this destroy you or if you're going to fight." "I don't know how to fight anymore," I admitted. "I'm so tired, Sophia." I know you are. But you don't have to fight alone. Over the next few weeks, Sophia became my lifeline. She connected me with a community health clinic that offered discounted medications for people without insurance. She helped me apply for assistance programs I didn't even know existed. She brought me meals when I was too weak to cook. She sat with me during the worst of the pain, holding my hand and telling me stories about her own life, stories of loss and survival that reminded me I wasn't the first person to feel this kind of betrayal. But more than that, she helped me see something I had lost sight of completely: my own worth. You spent your whole life taking care of someone else, she told me one evening as we sat on her balcony, watching the sunset. Maybe it's time you learned to take care of yourself. I don't even know who I am anymore, I confessed. I've been a mother for so long. That's all I've been. And now that Camilla doesn't need me, doesn't want me, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. You're supposed to live, Sophia said simply. Not for her, for you. It sounded so simple when she said it, but the reality was much harder. I had to learn how to exist in a world where my daughter didn't love me the way I loved her. I had to learn how to fill the hours that used to be devoted to worrying about her, planning for her, sacrificing for her. I had to learn how to look in the mirror and see someone worthy of care, worthy of kindness, worthy of a future. Sophia suggested I join a support group she knew about, a gathering of women who met once a week at the community center to share their experiences and support each other through difficult times. I resisted at first. The idea of sitting in a circle and talking about my feelings with strangers made me deeply uncomfortable. But Sophia was persistent, and eventually, I agreed to try it. The first meeting was harder than I expected. There were about 12 women there, ranging in age from their 40s to their 80s. Some looked put together and confident. Others looked as broken as I felt. We sat in a circle of mismatched chairs, and the facilitator, a kind woman named Patricia, explained that this was a safe space where we could share without judgment. One by one, the women began to speak. They told stories of abandonment, betrayal, loss. They talked about children who had forgotten them, husbands who had left them, families who had taken advantage of their kindness. They cried. They laughed. They held each other's pain with a gentleness that made my chest ache. When it was my turn to speak, I almost couldn't get the words out. My throat felt tight. My hands were shaking. But I forced myself to tell them what had happened. About Camilla. About the phone call. About feeling invisible in my own life. When I finished, there was a long silence. And then one of the older women, her name was Elena, spoke up. "Your daughter will regret this someday," she said quietly. "Maybe not today, maybe not for years, but one day, she'll understand what she lost. And by then, you'll have already learned how to live without her." Those words stayed with me long after the meeting ended. Learning to live without needing Camilla's approval felt like learning to breathe underwater. Every instinct in my body told me it was wrong, that mothers weren't supposed to give up on their children, that love was supposed to be enough to bridge any distance. But what I was slowly discovering, through those weekly meetings and late-night conversations with Sophia, was that I hadn't given up on Camilla. I had simply stopped sacrificing myself on the altar of her indifference. There's a difference, though it took me weeks to understand it. The support group became my anchor. Every Thursday evening, I would walk the 6 blocks to the community center, and for 2 hours, I would sit among women who understood what it meant to be discarded by the people you loved most. We didn't just share our pain, we shared our strategies for survival, our small victories, our moments of clarity that helped us see we were more than what had been done to us. Maria, a woman in her 60s, told us how her son had stolen her life savings to fund his gambling addiction, then blamed her for enabling him. Teresa shared how her husband of 30 years had left her for a younger woman, taking everything they'd built together and leaving her with nothing but debt. Anna spoke about her daughter who only called when she needed money, who treated her like an ATM machine with a guilt button. I listened to their stories and realized something that both comforted and devastated me. I wasn't special. My pain wasn't unique. All around the world, women like me were being used, discarded, forgotten by the children they had poured their lives into. And yet somehow, these women were still here, still fighting, still choosing to wake up every morning and face another day. If they could do it, Maybe I could too. But surviving wasn't the same as living. I was getting by, taking my medication, attending the support group, accepting Sophia's help when I needed it. But I wasn't truly alive. I was just going through the motions, waiting for something to change without knowing what that something was. Then one day, Sophia asked me a question that shifted everything. What did you used to love doing? Before Camilla? Before all of this? I stared at her, genuinely confused. What do you mean? I mean, what brought you joy? What made you feel like yourself? I opened my mouth to answer and realized I couldn't remember. Every hobby, every interest, every dream I'd ever had been set aside for motherhood, for work, for survival. I had become so consumed with taking care of others that I had completely forgotten how to take care of the parts of myself that weren't useful to anyone else. I used to bake, I said finally, the memory surfacing like something from another lifetime. When I was young, before Camilla was born, I loved to bake. Cakes, cookies, bread. My mother taught me. I used to dream about opening a small bakery someday. Sophia's face lit up. So why did you stop? There was no time, no money. It seemed silly to spend money on ingredients when we barely had enough for necessities. And now? Now what? Now you have time, Sophia said gently. Not a lot of money, I know, but some time, and a kitchen, and a neighbor who would love to taste whatever you make. The suggestion seemed absurd at first. I was sick, broke, abandoned by my only child. How could I possibly think about something as frivolous as baking? But the idea wouldn't leave me alone. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the smell of fresh bread, the satisfaction of watching dough rise, the simple pleasure of creating something with my own hands that brought joy to others. The next day, I used some of my grocery money to buy flour, sugar, eggs, and butter. My hands shook as I measured the ingredients, partly from nerves, partly from the medication that sometimes made me unsteady. I hadn't baked in over 20 years. What if I'd forgotten how? What if it was terrible? But as I mixed the batter for a simple vanilla cake, something inside me began to shift. My hands remembered the motions even when my mind doubted. The familiar rhythm of creaming butter and sugar, folding in flour, checking the oven temperature. It all came back to me like muscle memory. When I pulled the cake from the oven, golden and perfect, I actually smiled. A real smile, not the polite mask I'd been wearing for months. Sophia's reaction when I brought her a slice was worth every penny I'd spent. She closed her eyes as she tasted it, making small sounds of appreciation that made my chest warm with something I hadn't felt in so long. Pride. Marta, this is incredible, she said. You have a gift. I brushed off the compliment, but she insisted. I'm serious. You should make more. Bring some to the support group next week. I did. I made 3 dozen cookies, simple butter cookies with a hint of vanilla, and brought them in a borrowed container. The women's faces when they tasted them made me feel something I thought I'd lost forever. Valuable. Not because of what I could give someone else, not because of my usefulness as a mother or a worker, but because I had created something beautiful that brought others happiness. Patricia, the group facilitator, pulled me aside after the meeting. These are wonderful, Marta. Have you ever thought about selling them? The idea seemed impossible. I wouldn't even know where to start. Start small, she suggested. The community center has a little market every Saturday morning. Vendors sell homemade goods, crafts, produce, baked items. You could get a table. See what happens. I wanted to say no. I wanted to list all the reasons why it wouldn't work. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the way the other women had looked at me when they tasted the cookies, like I was someone worth paying attention to. Maybe it was Sophia's encouragement. Maybe it was simply that I had nothing left to lose. So I said yes. The first Saturday was terrifying. I woke up at 4 a.m. to bake. Chocolate chip cookies, lemon bars, cinnamon rolls, banana bread. My tiny kitchen became a factory, and I moved through it with a focus I hadn't felt in years. The pain in my chest was still there, but somehow it felt more manageable when I had something to concentrate on besides my own misery. I loaded everything into my car and drove to the community center, my stomach churning with anxiety. What if nobody bought anything? What if people hated what I made? What if I had wasted money I couldn't afford to waste? But within the first hour, Half my inventory was gone. People kept coming back to my table, complimenting the flavors, asking if I took special orders. By noon, I had sold everything and made more money in one morning than I usually earned in a week of odd jobs. I sat in my car afterward, staring at the cash in my hands, and cried. Not tears of sadness this time, but something else. Relief, maybe. Or hope. Or just the overwhelming realization that I could still create something meaningful in this world, even after everything that had been taken from me. Over the next few weeks, baking became my salvation. Every Saturday, I would wake up early and bake. Every Saturday, I would sell out. Slowly, I started to build a small following. People began to know my name, to seek out my tables specifically, to place orders for birthdays and celebrations. I wasn't making a lot of money, just enough to cover my medication and add a little to my savings. But it wasn't really about the money. It was about remembering that I was more than just someone's mother, more than just someone who had been rejected and forgotten. I was Marta, and I could still create beauty in the world. But even as things started to improve, even as I found small moments of joy and purpose, there was still a hollow ache in my chest that had nothing to do with my medical condition. At night, when the baking was done and the apartment was quiet, I would lie in bed and think about Camilla. I wondered if she ever thought about me, if she felt any guilt about what she'd said, if she knew I was struggling and simply didn't care, or if she had convinced herself that I was fine, that I had always been fine, that mothers didn't need the same care and concern they gave to their children. I wondered if I would ever hear from her again, and more painfully, I wondered if I even wanted to. The other women in the support group told me it was normal to feel this way, to be angry and heartbroken, and still desperately longing for reconciliation all at the same time. They told me that eventually, the pain would fade, that eventually, I would reach a place of acceptance. But they also warned me about something I wasn't prepared for. The moment when your child comes back into your life, not because they've changed, but because they need something. 3 months had passed since that terrible phone call. 3 months of learning to live with the silence, of building a life that didn't revolve around waiting for Camilla to remember I existed. 3 months of small victories that felt enormous to someone who had spent so long feeling worthless. My Saturday market booth had become something of a neighborhood fixture. Regular customers knew to arrive early for my cinnamon rolls, which always sold out first. I had started taking custom orders for birthday cakes and special occasions. It wasn't much, but it was mine, something I had built with my own 2 hands, something that existed independent of anyone else's approval or rejection. But late at night, when I was alone with my thoughts, the old questions still haunted me. How had I raised a daughter who could be so cold? Where had I gone wrong? Had I loved her too much? Not enough? In the wrong way? Sophia kept telling me to stop torturing myself with questions that had no answers. Some people are just takers, she would say. You can give them everything, and they'll still want more. It's not about you, Marta. It's about who they are. I wanted to believe her. But when it's your own child, it's impossible not to take it personally. Then one Thursday evening, during our support group meeting, something happened that made me see my situation from a different angle. A new woman had joined us, younger than most of us, maybe in her early 40s, with tired eyes and a nervous energy that reminded me of myself months earlier. Her name was Lucia, and when it was her turn to speak, she told us about her mother. "She's sick," Lucia said, her voice tight with frustration. "She needs help with medical bills, with daily care, with everything. And I can't do it. I have my own family, my own problems. I work full-time. My kids need me. My husband is stressed about money. I don't have anything left to give her." She paused, wiping her eyes. "And the worst part is, she acts like I owe her everything because she raised me. Like every sacrifice she made was some kind of loan I'm supposed to pay back with interest. But I didn't ask to be born. I didn't ask her to work herself to death for me. Those were her choices, not mine." The room went quiet. I could feel the other women shifting uncomfortably in their chairs, the same way I was, because we had all heard our own children's voices in what Lucia was saying, even if they had never spoken those exact words to us. Patricia, our facilitator, spoke gently. "Lucia, what you're feeling is valid. Caregiver burnout is real, and it's important to set boundaries. But I wonder, Have you considered that your mother might not see her sacrifices as loans that need repayment? That maybe she just wants to know her daughter cares whether she lives or dies? Lucia's face crumpled. I do care. But caring doesn't pay her medical bills. Caring doesn't give me more hours in the day. Caring doesn't solve anything. I found myself speaking before I could stop myself. So you'd rather she suffer alone than ask for help you're not willing to give? Lucia's eyes snapped to mine, defensive. That's not fair. You don't know my situation. You're right, I said quietly. I don't know your situation, but I know what it feels like to be your mother. I told her about Camila, about the phone call, about living on one egg and stale bread while my daughter went out with friends, about crying myself to sleep in a car because I had nowhere else to go, about the crushing realization that the person I had given my whole life to would rather watch me die than inconvenience herself. By the time I finished, Lucia was crying silently, and so were several other women in the circle. I didn't know, Lucia whispered. I didn't know it felt like that for her. Maybe you should ask, I suggested, not unkindly. Before it's too late, before she stops hoping you'll care. After the meeting ended, Lucia approached me. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone. Will you be here while I call her? I don't think I can do it alone. So I sat with this stranger in the parking lot of the community center while she called her sick mother and apologized through tears. I listened as she promised to visit that weekend, to help figure out the medical bills, to just be there. I watched her face transform from guilt and defensiveness to relief, and something that looked like love, the kind that had been buried under resentment and fear but was still there, waiting to be rediscovered. When she hung up, she turned to me. Thank you. I think you saved my relationship with my mother tonight. But driving home, all I could think was, who's going to save mine? Because the truth I was finally accepting was that Camila might never have her Lucia moment. She might never call to apologize. She might never understand what she'd done to me, or even care to try, and I needed to figure out how to live with that. The weeks continued to pass. My baking business grew slowly but steadily. Sophia introduced me to some of her friends, other older women who had survived their own heartbreaks and disappointments, and gradually, I found myself building a new kind of family, not the one I had dreamed of, but one that chose to show up for each other, that understood that love wasn't just a feeling, but a series of actions, small kindnesses repeated until they became the foundation of something real. I started volunteering at the community center on Tuesday afternoons, helping to organize the food pantry. It felt good to be useful again, but in a different way than before. I wasn't sacrificing myself. I was contributing to something larger than my own pain. My health stabilized. The medication I could now afford was doing its job. The pain that had once consumed every moment of my day became something I could manage, something that existed in the background, rather than the foreground of my life. I was surviving. More than that, I was beginning to heal. But healing isn't linear. And just when I thought I had reached a place of acceptance, just when I thought I could finally let go of the hope that Camila would come back, the universe decided to test me in a way I never saw coming. It was a Saturday evening. The market had been particularly good that day. I'd sold out by 11 and had several new orders for the following week. I was in my kitchen, already preparing dough for the next day, when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was a number I didn't recognize. Usually that meant spam or telemarketers, but something made me pick up. Mom? My heart stopped. Camilla's voice, after 3 months of silence, sounded different, smaller, scared. Camila? I managed to say, my hands suddenly shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. Mom, I need to talk to you. Can I come over? 1,000 emotions crashed through me at once. Relief that she was alive. Anger that she was calling now, after everything. Fear that something terrible had happened. And underneath it all, that pathetic, desperate hope that maybe she had finally realized what she'd done. That maybe she was calling to apologize. When? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Now? If that's okay? It wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. But I heard myself saying yes anyway because even after everything, she was still my daughter. And I was still her mother, even if she had forgotten what that was supposed to mean. I hung up and stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the life I had painstakingly rebuilt, and felt it all start to crack under the weight of one phone call. Sophia had warned me about this. The other women in the support group had warned me about this. They had told me that when your child comes back, it's rarely because they've changed. It's because they need something. I looked around my small apartment, at the baking supplies organized neatly on my shelves, at the photos from the community market where I was smiling genuinely for the first time in years, at the small stack of cash I'd been saving for a new oven, at all the evidence of the life I was building without her, and I wondered if I was strong enough to protect it. 40 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Camilla standing there with 2 suitcases and a face that looked like it had been crying for days. "Mom," she said, her voice breaking, "I got evicted. I have nowhere else to go." I stood in my doorway, looking at my daughter, really looking at her, for the first time in months. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her clothes were wrinkled, like she'd been wearing them for days. Her eyes were red and puffy, her face pale and drawn. She looked defeated in a way I'd never seen before. And my first instinct, God help me, was to pull her inside, to hold her, to tell her everything would be okay, because that's what mothers do. That's what I had always done. But I didn't move. I stayed in the doorway, one hand on the frame, creating a barrier between us that had never existed before. "You got evicted," I repeated, my voice flat. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I lost my job 2 months ago. I couldn't make rent. The landlord gave me notice and I thought I'd find something else, but nothing worked out and now—" Her voice broke. "I have nowhere to go, Mom. Please." 2 months ago. The same time she told me she wasn't my bank. The same time she told me I should have planned better. She had been struggling then, probably scared about her own finances, and instead of being honest with me, instead of saying, "Mom, I'm sorry, but I'm dealing with my own crisis right now," she had simply been cruel. "What about your friends?" I asked. "The ones you were with when I called you?" She looked down. "They said they couldn't help. Their apartments are too small, or they have roommates who wouldn't be okay with it, or—" She trailed off, and I understood what she wasn't saying. Her friends had given her the same answer she had given me, just with more polite excuses. "What about your father? He's remarried. His new wife doesn't want me there." Fresh tears fell. "Mom, please. I know I messed up. I know I said things I shouldn't have. But you're my mother. You're supposed to help me." There it was. The expectation that had defined our entire relationship. I was supposed to help her. I was supposed to sacrifice. I was supposed to put her needs above my own, always, no matter what she had done or said, because I was her mother. And that was supposed to be enough. I felt something shift inside me. Not breaking. I had already broken 3 months ago. This was something else. This was the sound of pieces settling into a new arrangement. One where I didn't automatically bend myself into whatever shape she needed. "Come in," I said finally, stepping back. Relief flooded her face. She grabbed her suitcases and moved past me into the apartment, already looking around like she was calculating where she would sleep, how long she could stay. I closed the door and leaned against it, watching her. She had set her bags down in the middle of my small living room, and she was looking at me expectantly, waiting for me to tell her what happened next, waiting for me to fix everything, the way I always had. "Sit down, Camilla," I said quietly. She sat on my second-hand couch, the one I'd bought from a thrift store after Ryan took our furniture. She looked so young sitting there, despite being 25 years old. She looked like the little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she was scared, who used to think I could solve any problem. I pulled a chair from the kitchen and sat across from her, maintaining distance. "Do you remember what you said to me 3 months ago?" I asked. She looked down at her hands. "Mom, I already said I'm sorry." "No," I interrupted. "You said you know you messed up. That's not the same as being sorry. So I'm asking you, do you remember what you said?" There was a long silence, then barely audible. "I said I wasn't your bank." "You said I should have planned better," I continued, my voice steady despite the way my heart was pounding. "You said that supporting you was my choice, and I couldn't make you feel guilty about it." "I was stressed," she said defensively. "I was dealing with my own problems. I didn't mean—" "What problems, Camilla?" I leaned forward. "The ones you didn't tell me about? The ones you were already facing when you decided my life-threatening illness was an inconvenience? Her face flushed. That's not fair, isn't it? I felt my voice rising and forced it back down. When I called you, I wasn't asking for money for a vacation or a new car. I was asking for help buying medication that I needed to survive. And you told me no. You told me I should have planned better. You told me I was trying to make you feel guilty. I didn't know how bad it was, she whispered. You didn't ask. You didn't want to know, because knowing would have meant having to care, and caring would have meant making a choice about what kind of person you wanted to be. I paused, letting that sink in. And you chose to be someone who would let her mother suffer rather than skip a few dinners with friends. She was crying harder now, her shoulders shaking. Part of me wanted to comfort her, to take back the words that were clearly causing her pain. But I thought about Sophia, about the women in the support group, about all the nights I had cried alone in my car or in this apartment, wondering what I had done to deserve such coldness from my own child. I'm sorry, Camilla sobbed. I'm so sorry, Mom. I was selfish and stupid, and I should have helped you. Please forgive me. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that this apology was genuine, that she had spent the last 3 months reflecting on her behavior and realizing how deeply she had hurt me. But the timing was too convenient. She hadn't come back because she had changed. She had come back because she needed something. If you hadn't gotten evicted, I said softly, would you be here right now? Would you have ever called to apologize? She opened her mouth, then closed it. The answer was written all over her face. That's what I thought, I said. Mom, please. I know I don't deserve your help. I know I've been a terrible daughter, but I have nowhere else to go. I'm asking you, I'm begging you, please let me stay. Just for a little while, until I get back on my feet. I looked at her. This woman who had grown in my body, who I had loved before I even knew what love was, who I had given everything to, and I felt my heart breaking in a completely new way, because I finally understood something I had been refusing to see. Camilla didn't love me the way I loved her. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe I had made her incapable of it by never teaching her that relationships were supposed to be reciprocal, that love wasn't just something you received, but something you gave back. Or maybe she was just selfish. Maybe some people were simply wired to take and never feel the weight of what they owed to others. Either way, the result was the same. If I let her stay, if I fell back into the pattern of sacrificing myself for her comfort, nothing would change. She would take what she needed and leave again the moment something better came along, and I would be left alone again. Except this time, I wouldn't be able to pretend I hadn't seen it coming. No, I said. She stared at me like I had spoken a foreign language. What? No, you can't stay here. But you're my mother. You have to help me. I don't have to do anything, I said, surprised by how calm I sounded. I chose to help you for your entire life. I chose to work myself into the ground so you could have things I never had. I chose to skip meals so you could eat. I chose to live in a car so you could have a nice apartment with your friends. Those were my choices, and I don't regret them. But you also made choices, Camilla. And one of those choices was to tell your sick mother that her suffering wasn't your problem. I didn't mean it like that. Yes, you did. You meant exactly that. And that's okay. You're an adult. You get to make your own choices about who you help and who you don't. But so do I. She stood up, her face transforming from devastation to anger. So you're going to let me be homeless? Your own daughter? I'm going to let you figure out your own life, I corrected. The same way you let me figure out mine when I needed you. The anger in Camilla's face was something I had never seen directed at me before. She had been angry at teachers, at friends, at her father, but never at me, because I had never given her a reason to be angry. I had always said yes. I had always accommodated. I had always put her first. You've changed, she said, her voice sharp with accusation. You're not the same person anymore. You're right, I said simply. I'm not. The mother I knew would never turn her back on me like this. The mother you knew almost died alone because her daughter told her to plan better. I kept my voice steady, even though my hands were trembling. That mother doesn't exist anymore. So what? You're going to punish me forever? Is that it? Her tears had stopped. replaced by a hardness that reminded me uncomfortably of the voice on the phone 3 months ago. I made a mistake, and now you're going to make me pay for it by letting me end up on the street. I'm not punishing you, Camilla. I'm protecting myself. From what? From your own daughter? Yes, I said, and the admission felt like cutting off a limb. From someone who only values me when she needs something. From someone who treated me like garbage when I was at my lowest point. From someone who is only here right now because she has nowhere else to go, not because she actually cares whether I'm alive or dead. That's not true. But her protest sounded hollow, even to her own ears. Isn't it? If I hadn't opened this door tonight, if I had told you I couldn't help, how long would it have been before you called me again? A year? 5 years? Would you have ever called just to see how I was doing? She didn't answer. Couldn't answer because we both knew the truth. I stood up, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the physical pain that still visited me on bad days. There's a shelter 3 blocks from here. The New Hope Community Church. They help women who are going through hard times. They'll give you a place to sleep, help you find work, get you back on your feet. A shelter? She looked at me with disbelief. You're sending me to a homeless shelter? I'm giving you the same resource someone gave me when I had nowhere to go, I said quietly. When you decided I wasn't worth helping. The shock on her face told me she hadn't known, hadn't imagined, hadn't bothered to wonder what had happened to me after that phone call. You were homeless? Her voice was barely a whisper. I lived in my car for 5 days. I collapsed from malnutrition and dehydration. A nurse at the hospital told me about the shelter, and they saved my life. The same shelter I'm telling you about now. I watched the information sink in, watched her try to process the reality of what I had gone through while she was out with friends, complaining about her job, living in her apartment that she apparently couldn't afford, but hadn't bothered to mention when she was telling me to manage my own problems. Mom, I didn't know. You didn't want to know. There's a difference. I walked to the door and opened it, standing beside it in a gesture that was unmistakable. She stared at me for a long moment, as if waiting for me to change my mind, to crack, to return to being the mother who always gave in. But I had learned something important over the past 3 months. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's self-destruction dressed up as virtue. Camilla picked up her suitcases, moving slowly, as if hoping I would stop her at any moment. When she reached the door, she turned back one last time. I can't believe you're doing this to me, she said, and there was genuine pain in her voice. But it was the pain of someone confronting consequences for the first time, not the pain of someone who understood what they had done wrong. I can't believe you did what you did to me, I replied. But we both have to live with the choices we've made. She left without another word. I closed the door behind her and stood there, listening to her footsteps fade down the hallway. Then I walked to my window and watched her load her suitcases into a taxi, watched the car pull away into the night. And then I collapsed onto my couch and cried harder than I had cried in months. Because saying no to your child, even when they've hurt you beyond measure, even when you know it's the right thing to do, still feels like tearing out your own heart. I called Sophia immediately. She answered on the second ring, as if she'd been waiting for my call. She came back, I said without preamble. I know. I heard her in the hallway. Sophia lived on the same floor. Of course she had heard. And you sent her away. I sent her to the shelter, the one that helped me. Good, Sophia said firmly. That took tremendous strength, Marta. Then why do I feel like the worst person in the world? Because you're a mother. And mothers are taught that their job is to sacrifice everything, even their own well-being, even their own dignity, for their children. But that's a lie. Your job is to love her. And sometimes loving someone means letting them face the consequences of their actions. What if something happens to her? What if nothing is going to happen to her? Sophia interrupted gently. The shelter is safe. The people there are good. They'll help her the same way they helped you. And maybe, just maybe, having to accept help from strangers will teach her something about humility and gratitude that you could never teach her by enabling her behavior. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that this would be a learning experience for Camilla, that she would come out the other side a better person, that someday she would understand why I had done what I did. But I also knew that some people never learn. Some people go through life blaming others for their problems, never taking responsibility, never recognizing their own role in their circumstances. I didn't know which kind of person Camilla was, and that was the hardest part, not knowing if I had just given my daughter the wake-up call she needed, or if I had simply driven the final nail into the coffin of our relationship. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our conversation, second-guessing every word I had said, wondering if I should have handled it differently. But then I thought about the woman I had been 3 months ago, desperate, sick, living in her car, abandoned by the person she loved most in the world. I thought about how much strength it had taken to survive that, how much courage it had taken to accept help from Sophia, to join the support group, to start baking again, to rebuild a life that had crumbled to dust. And I realized that if I let Camilla back in without any accountability, without any acknowledgement of the harm she had caused, I would be betraying that woman. I would be telling her that all that growth, all that pain, all that hard-won strength meant nothing. I couldn't do that, not even for my daughter. The next morning, I went to the shelter, not to check on Camilla. I knew that would send the wrong message, would suggest that I was still available to rescue her whenever things got difficult. But I needed to know that she had actually gone there, that she was safe. Judy, the shelter coordinator, recognized me immediately. "Marta, it's so good to see you. How are you doing?" "I'm okay," I said. "Better than okay, actually. The baking business is going well. My health is stable. I'm managing." "I'm so glad to hear that." She smiled warmly. "And I want you to know, your daughter came in last night. She's here." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by a complicated mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. "How is she?" "Struggling," Judy said honestly. "But isn't that why people come here? She'll be okay, Marta. We'll take care of her the same way we took care of you." "Thank you," I whispered. Judy studied my face for a moment. "This is hard for you. Harder than I expected. Would you like to talk to her? I can arrange." "No," I said quickly. "Not yet. She needs to do this on her own, without me fixing things for her." Judy nodded with understanding. "You know, we see this sometimes. Adult children who've never learned to stand on their own because their parents never stopped carrying them. It's one of the hardest patterns to break, but it's also one of the most important." Over the next week, I threw myself into my baking with the intensity that surprised even me. I took on more custom orders than I could reasonably handle, stayed up late perfecting new recipes, experimented with flavors and techniques I'd never tried before. It was easier to focus on the tangible, the concrete, than to sit with the uncomfortable feelings swirling inside me. The women in my support group were divided about what I'd done. Some thought I was too harsh, that family should always come first no matter what. Others thought I hadn't been harsh enough, that I should have refused to even tell Camilla about the shelter. But Patricia, our facilitator, said something that stuck with me. There's no right answer when it comes to broken relationships with adult children. There's only what you can live with, and only you can decide what that is. What could I live with? I could live with Camilla being angry at me. I could live with the possibility that she might never forgive me. I could even live with the small, terrible voice in my head that whispered I was a bad mother for turning her away. What I couldn't live with was going back to being the woman who had no value except what she could give to others. The woman who sacrificed her health, her dignity, her very survival, because she believed that's what love required. That woman had almost died, and I wasn't going to resurrect her, not even for my daughter. 2 weeks passed, then 3. I didn't hear from Camilla, and I forced myself not to ask Judy about her progress at the shelter. This was her journey to take, and I had to respect that, even when every maternal instinct screamed at me to check on her, to make sure she was okay, to fix whatever problems she was facing. But I knew that if I interfered now, if I swooped in to rescue her before she had truly learned anything, I would only be repeating the same pattern that had brought us to this point. And I would lose the ground I had fought so hard to gain. My life continued to move forward. The Saturday market had become the highlight of my week. I had regular customers now, people who knew my name, who asked about my health, who told me stories about their own lives while they selected brownies or placed orders for special occasions. I wasn't just the woman behind the table selling baked goods. I was Marta, and I mattered to these people in a way that had nothing to do with what I could sacrifice for them. One Saturday morning, About a month after I had sent Camilla to the shelter, something unexpected happened. I was arranging fresh cinnamon rolls on my display when I looked up and saw her standing on the other side of the table. She looked different, cleaner, more put together than she had the night she showed up at my door. Her hair was washed and styled. She wore simple clothes that looked like they might have come from the shelter's donation closet, but they were clean and pressed. There were shadows under her eyes, but her face had a quality I hadn't seen in years, something that looked almost like humility. "Mom," she said quietly. My heart lurched. Every instinct told me to rush around the table and hug her, to ask if she was okay, to tell her I had missed her. But I stayed where I was, my hands resting on the table between us. "Camila," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Can we talk?" I glanced at the line of customers forming behind her. "I'm working right now." "I know. I can wait." She stepped aside, and I watched as she moved to a bench near my table and sat down, her hands folded in her lap, her posture patient in a way I had never seen from her before. The morning seemed to drag on forever. I served customers, made change, answered questions about ingredients, all while acutely aware of Camilla sitting on that bench, waiting. Several times I caught her watching me work, an expression on her face I couldn't quite read. When the last customer finally left and I began packing up my remaining inventory, Camilla approached again. "I got a job," she said without preamble. "At a restaurant. Judy helped me get it. It's just washing dishes, but it's something. I start on Monday." "That's good," I said, meaning it. "I'm glad. The shelter has been—" She paused, searching for words. "It's been hard. Really hard. Sharing a room with 3 other women, following all the rules, having to be accountable for where I am and what I'm doing, having to accept help from strangers who owe me nothing." I continued packing up, letting her talk. "One of the women in my room, her name is Sarah. She has 2 kids. She's there because she left an abusive husband. She has nothing, Mom. Absolutely nothing. And she shares her food with me. She helped me practice for job interviews even though she has her own problems that are so much worse than mine." Camilla's voice cracked slightly, and I kept thinking, why is this stranger being kinder to me than I was to my own mother? I looked up then, meeting her eyes for the first time. "I've been going to the support groups at the shelter," she continued. "Judy makes everyone attend, and I've been listening to these women talk about their lives, about the things that brought them there. And Mom, some of them are there because their kids abandoned them, because their own children treated them like they were worthless." She wiped her eyes. "There's this one woman, Elena. She's 68 years old. She raised 4 kids by herself after her husband died. She worked 3 jobs to put them through school. And when she got sick and couldn't work anymore, not one of her children would take her in. They all had excuses. No room, too busy, their own problems to deal with. She ended up at the shelter because the people who were supposed to love her most in the world decided she was a burden. I knew Elena. She had been part of my support group before moving to the shelter's program. She was one of the kindest, strongest women I had ever met, and her children's cruelty had broken something in her that might never fully heal. "I've been listening to her story," Camilla said, "and I kept thinking, that's not me. I'm not like her kids. But then I realized, I am exactly like them. I did exactly what they did. Maybe worse because you were literally asking me to help save your life, and I told you no." The tears were flowing freely now, and she made no attempt to wipe them away. "I didn't know you were homeless, Mom. I didn't know you lived in your car. I didn't know you collapsed. I didn't know any of it because I didn't ask. I didn't care enough to ask." I set down the container I was holding. My hands were shaking. I told myself I was being independent, that I was setting boundaries, that I couldn't be responsible for your choices. But the truth is, I was just being selfish. I was being cruel. And I didn't even realize it until I ended up in the exact same position, desperate and scared and needing help from someone who had every right to turn me away. She took a step closer. "You could have let me be homeless. You could have told me to figure it out on my own, the same way I told you. And it would have been fair. It would have been exactly what I deserved. But you didn't," she continued, her voice breaking. "You sent me somewhere safe. You made sure I would be okay even though I didn't make sure you were okay. Even after everything I said to you, you still protected me. I felt my own tears starting to fall. You're my daughter, Camilla. I couldn't just— You could have, she interrupted. You had every right to, but you didn't. And that's the difference between you and me. You know how to love someone even when they hurt you. I only knew how to love people when it was convenient. The morning sun was getting higher, and other vendors were starting to pack up around us. But I barely noticed. All I could see was my daughter standing in front of me, finally, truly seeing me for the first time in years. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. Not because I need something from you now. I mean, I do need things, but that's not why I'm apologizing. I'm sorry because I hurt you. Because I was cruel when you needed compassion. Because I treated you like you didn't matter when you've been the only person who's ever really been there for me. She pulled something from her pocket. A small envelope. This is $40. It's from my first week's pay at the restaurant. Judy helped me budget, and this is what I can afford to give you right now. I know it's not much. I know it doesn't come close to covering what I owe you for everything you've done for me over the years, or even for the medication you needed. But it's a start. She held out the envelope, her hand trembling slightly. I want to pay you back, Mom. Not because I think money can fix what I did, but because I want to show you that I understand now. I understand what it means to work hard for every dollar. I understand what it means to sacrifice. I understand what you did for me all those years. I looked at the envelope, at my daughter's outstretched hand, at her face that showed genuine remorse for the first time since this nightmare began. Part of me wanted to refuse the money, to tell her she didn't owe me anything. But I knew that would be wrong. She needed this, needed to take responsibility, needed to make amends in whatever way she could, needed to understand that love wasn't just words, but actions. I took the envelope. Thank you, I said softly. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, Camilla said. I don't expect you to let me back into your life like nothing happened. I know I broke your trust. I know I have to earn it back. But I want to try, if you'll let me. I want to be the daughter you deserved to have all along. I looked at this young woman, my daughter, who I had loved from the moment I knew she existed, who had hurt me deeper than I thought possible, who was finally standing before me not with demands, but with accountability. It's going to take time, I said finally. A lot of time. I can't just forget what happened. I can't just go back to the way things were. I don't want to go back to the way things were, she said quickly. That was broken. I was taking from you and never giving back, and that's not a real relationship. That's not love. I want something different, something better, even if it takes years. I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something like the possibility of forgiveness. The beginning of a path forward that neither of us could see clearly, but that we might be able to walk together. Slowly, carefully, one painful step at a time. 6 months have passed since that morning at the market. 6 months of slow, careful steps toward rebuilding something that had been shattered so completely, I once thought it could never be repaired. Camilla still lives at the shelter, though Judy tells me she's close to saving enough for a small apartment. She works full-time now at the restaurant. They promoted her from dishwasher to prep cook when they saw how hard she worked, how reliable she was. Every 2 weeks, she brings me an envelope with money. Sometimes it's $40, sometimes $60, depending on her tips and hours. I've started putting it in a savings account for her, though I haven't told her that yet. She needs to learn what it means to give without expecting anything back. We meet for coffee every Sunday afternoon at a small cafe halfway between my apartment and the shelter. At first, these meetings were awkward, stilted, full of long silences neither of us knew how to fill. We were like strangers learning each other for the first time, except we carried the weight of our entire history between us. But slowly, something new has been growing, something that feels more solid than what we had before, built on honesty instead of obligation, on mutual respect instead of one-sided sacrifice. She tells me about her life, not just the highlights she thinks will impress me, but the real struggles too. How hard it is to be on her feet for 8-hour shifts. How one of her roommates at the shelter has nightmares that wake everyone up. How she's learning to budget, to save, to plan for a future that doesn't depend on someone else rescuing her when things go wrong. And I tell her about mine, about the baking business that keeps growing, about the new industrial mixer Sophia helped me buy secondhand, about the woman who ordered a 3-tier wedding cake that challenged every skill I'd developed, about the support group and the women there who have become like family to me. Last month, Camilla asked if she could come to one of my Saturday markets. Not to ask for anything, she assured me quickly, just to see the thing I had built, the life I was living. I hesitated. That market had become my sacred space, my proof that I could create something valuable independent of anyone else. Letting her into it felt vulnerable in a way I wasn't sure I was ready for, but I said yes. Because healing requires vulnerability, even when it's terrifying. She came early that Saturday, before my regular customers arrived, and helped me set up my table. She arranged the pastries with careful attention, asked questions about ingredients and techniques, listened when I explained how I'd developed each recipe, and when customers started coming, she stood to the side and watched me work with an expression I had never seen on her face before, something that looked like pride mixed with regret. Afterward, as we were packing up, she said quietly, "You're really good at this, Mom. I never knew. I never paid attention to what you were good at, what made you happy. I only ever thought about what you could do for me." That honesty, that willingness to acknowledge uncomfortable truths, is what has made these past 6 months different from everything that came before. Sophia has been watching our careful reconciliation with the wise eyes of someone who understands that some relationships are worth saving, and some aren't. And the hardest part is knowing which is which. She told me last week that she's proud of me for not making it easy for Camilla, for holding her accountable while still leaving the door open for growth. "You're teaching her something she should have learned years ago," Sophia said. "That love isn't just receiving, it's giving, it's showing up. It's doing the hard work of being present for someone even when it's inconvenient." The women in my support group have watched the transformation too. Some of them are skeptical, warning me not to trust too quickly, reminding me that people can fake change when they need something. Others are hopeful, telling me that sometimes people really do learn from their mistakes, that rock bottom can be the foundation for something stronger. I don't know yet which one Camilla will be. I want to believe she's changed, that the young woman who brings me coffee and asks about my day and looks at me like I'm a person instead of just a resource is the real version of my daughter, finally visible after years of being hidden behind selfishness and entitlement. But I also know that I'll be okay either way, because I've learned the most important lesson of my entire life. My worth doesn't depend on whether my daughter loves me the way I love her. My value doesn't come from what I can sacrifice for others. I am enough, all by myself, with my small apartment and my baking business, and my chosen family of women who understand what it means to survive the unsurvivable. Yesterday, something happened that felt like a turning point. Camilla called me, not on Sunday, not during our scheduled time, but on a random Tuesday evening. My heart jumped when I saw her name on my phone, old fears rushing back. Was something wrong? Did she need money? Had something happened at the shelter? "Mom?" Her voice was nervous. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "No, I was just cleaning up the kitchen. What's going on?" "Nothing's wrong," she said quickly, as if reading my mind. I was thinking about you, and I wanted to call and tell you that I love you. Not because I need something, not because it's Mother's Day or your birthday or some special occasion, just because it's true, and I don't think I've said it enough. Or maybe I've said the words, but I haven't shown it, which is the same as not saying it at all. I sat down on my couch, tears already forming. "Thank you for telling me that. I've been thinking a lot about what Elena said at group last week, about how the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And I realized that's what I showed you for so long, indifference. Like you were just part of the background of my life instead of the person who made my life possible." She paused, and I could hear her breathing, working up the courage to continue. "I want you to know that I see you now, Mom. I see how hard you worked for me. I see how much you sacrificed. I see how strong you had to be to survive what I put you through. And I see how much strength it took to set boundaries with me, to not let me just waltz back into your life without changing anything. That was the hardest thing I've ever done," I admitted. "I know, but it was also the most loving thing you could have done, because if you had just let me come back, if you had enabled me to keep being selfish and taking you for granted, I never would have learned. I never would have grown up. I'd still be the person who thinks love is just something you receive instead of something you have to actively choose to give. We talked for over an hour that night. Not about anything important, just the small details of our lives that we had never bothered to share before. She told me about a rude customer at the restaurant and how she had handled it professionally instead of losing her temper. I told her about a new recipe I was experimenting with that kept falling flat. We laughed together, really laughed, for the first time in years. When we finally hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment and felt something I hadn't felt since Camilla was a small child, before life and disappointment and my own mistakes in raising her had complicated everything. Hope. Not the desperate, clinging hope I'd carried for so many years. The hope that if I just loved her enough, sacrificed enough, gave enough, she would eventually love me back the way I needed. But something gentler, more sustainable. The hope that maybe, just maybe, we could build something real together. Something based on mutual respect and genuine affection, instead of obligation and guilt. I still don't know how this story ends. I don't know if Camilla and I will ever have the close, easy relationship I once dreamed of. I don't know if she'll maintain these changes, or if one day she'll slip back into old patterns. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust her not to hurt me again. But I know this. I survived the worst thing I could imagine. I survived being abandoned by the person I loved most, being left to die alone, losing everything I thought defined me. And not only did I survive, I rebuilt. I found strength I didn't know I had. I created a life that brings me joy independent of anyone else's approval or presence. I learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to be destroyed by someone else's cruelty, even when that someone is your own child. I learned that boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges to healthier relationships. I learned that sacrifice without reciprocity isn't love, it's self-destruction. And I learned that it's never too late to choose yourself, to say no to relationships that diminish you, to build a life that honors your worth instead of constantly questioning it. Some people might think I was too harsh with Camilla. Some might think I should have welcomed her back with open arms, forgiven immediately, returned to being the mother who fixes everything. But those people have never lain in the back of a car, wondering if anyone would notice if they simply stopped existing. They've never had to choose between medication and food. They've never heard their own child tell them they're not worth helping. I did what I had to do to survive. And in doing so, I gave Camilla something more valuable than another rescue, another free pass, another opportunity to take without giving. I gave her the chance to grow up, to learn empathy, to understand that relationships require effort from both sides. Whether she takes that chance and runs with it, or whether she eventually falls back into old habits, isn't something I can control. All I can control is whether I maintain the boundaries that keep me safe and whole. And I will. Because I finally understand that I matter. Not because of what I can do for others. Not because of my role as a mother. Not because of my ability to sacrifice and endure. I matter simply because I exist. Because I am a person with dreams and talents and worth that exists independent of anyone else's recognition of it. That's what I want to say to anyone listening to this story. Anyone who has ever felt invisible in their own family. Anyone who has given everything only to be told it wasn't enough. You matter. Your needs matter. Your pain matters. And you have the right to protect yourself, even from people you love, especially from people you love, when they treat you like you don't. It's not selfish to set boundaries. It's not cruel to expect reciprocity. It's not wrong to choose survival when the alternative is being slowly destroyed by someone else's selfishness. I spent 55 years believing that a mother's love meant endless sacrifice, that I should give until there was nothing left of me. And where did that get me? Living in my car, eating one egg for dinner, wondering if I would survive the night. Now I know better. Now I know that the truest form of love, for your children, for others, but especially for yourself, is to recognize that you have value beyond what you can give away, that taking care of yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is no. I'm still learning this lesson every day. There are still moments when I want to fall back into old patterns, when saying no to Camilla feels like I'm failing as a mother. But then I remember the woman who collapsed in that parking lot, who had given everything and been left with nothing, who almost didn't survive her own generosity, and I choose to honor her. I choose to protect her. I choose to make sure she never has to live in her car again, or wonder if anyone cares whether she lives or dies, because she matters. I matter. And that's not something anyone else gets to decide for me anymore. If you've made it to the end of my story, thank you for listening. Thank you for witnessing my pain and my survival. And if you're in a similar situation, if you're struggling with a child or family member who takes without giving, who treats you like you're worthless, please know, you're not alone. You're not crazy. You're not being too sensitive or too demanding. You're simply asking to be treated with the basic human dignity that everyone deserves. And you have every right to walk away from people who refuse to give you that, even when those people are your own children, especially when those people are your own children. Because sometimes the greatest act of love is loving yourself enough to say no. Type 9 in the comments if you stayed with me until the end. And tell me, what city are you watching from? I'd love to know where my story reached you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And remember, you matter. You always mattered, even when the people closest to you couldn't see it.